Happy Halloween, Wizards, from Ziggy and I. I'm wearing a Beetlejuice shirt. You can't really tell. Here he is. There's his face right there. It just kind of looks like I'm wearing a very dirty purple shirt. But no, it's a Halloween shirt, bud. Anyway, you're dressed as Ziggy, and it's a very good costume. We've got some spoilers to look at today, little previews from Mtg Foundations, and we are kind of wrapping things up. There are very, very few cards left to preview as I'm starting to record this video. For all I know, they'll come out while I'm recording this video. Guess we'll find out together. But either way, I plan on doing like a kind of wrap-up video tomorrow. So stick with the channel, sub to the sandwich, eat some meatballs, do all the things. But let's go ahead and get to the cards because we've got nearly 40 of them to cover. Because we've got so many cards to look at. That's what I wanted that to sound like, but I didn't enunciate properly, and I was trying to talk too fast, so it came out like Bakowaga. So, Bakowaga got so many cards today, we probably need to go ahead and look at them, starting with the reprints, as we've been doing most of this previous season. I am sorry to take Ziggy away from you, but there's about to be a card right in front of Ziggy. Here's Skeleton Archers, right there. There it is. Sorry, bud. You're looking right at me. You can't tell, but he's looking directly at me. But either way, Skeleton Archers is a dude that I've always kind of liked. 4 mana for a 3/3. That's a Hill Giant, but this Hill Giant pops something for damage when it comes into play. That's blinkable. I guess you can do way better stuff for 4 mana, but it's got a creature type I'm into, and I've always liked the art. Good to have you back, bud. But we also got Crow of Dark Tidings today. Not bad, right? No, it's pretty bad. It's kind of bad. So it comes into play and it mills you some. And then when it dies, it mills you some. So that seems tempting, but there's probably way better ways to actually mill yourself in this format. So I'm not going to play this in Standard. Nevermore. That's a Raven, not a Crow. Close enough, but it's a Corvid. Next is, what is it? Mallfield Twins, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce this. Mallfield Twins. So it's a 6-mana 4/4. And then when it dies, you get a couple of 2/2s. Not like you do ballet in, not like 2/2s, but you get 2 power, 2 toughness creatures. So that is also not great, but we're seeing a kind of zombie theme come together at the beginning of the day here. Have you noticed these are all spooky cards? Spooky Halloween cards like zombies and such, like Diregraph Ghoul. We got that today too. This is kind of okay. Always has been. 1 mana 2/2. Comes into play tapped, who cares? It's got the right creature type. Good for zombie decks. You need 1 drops. Why am I doing like a not even a good British accent? Anyway, Cemetery Recruitment is up next. This is 2 mana for a Raise Dead effect, but if it raises dead a zombie, you draw a card. All right, that's fine. Again, a lot of zombie stuff today, but we saw Undying Malice as well. Should I be doing these in a Crypt Keeper voice? Kitties! Undying Malice! I can't do it. So Undying Malice is one of these like save your guy in black effects, right? So that means that the guy's going to leave the table for a second. He's going to come right back. And that means that you're kind of blinking him in response to a removal spell. That could be really, really good. Or not great. Like you wanted a guy to do combat damage. It's not good at that. But if you do want to repeat an ETB trigger or just save an important guy and you're not playing green or white, this is a good choice. Oh, hey, a blue card. Are we done with spooky stuff? It's Eaten by Piranhas. No, it's pretty spooky. It's actually very spooky. So I've always kind of liked this, the short amount of time that we've had it. Good removal just blanks a guy at instant speed. So, I'll take that from time to time. It triggers eerie, sure. But if you don't want to be eaten by piranhas, what if instead you were eaten alive? This is a pretty new card too, but good to have this for 5 years in Standard. It's your quintessential Bone Splinters effect, but it's a really kind of powerful version of that. But moving on, we also got Deadly Plot, printed in Jumpstart. Had to make sure this wasn't a brand new card. Turns out it's not. This is actually kind of all right. All right, so this is 4 mana at instant speed to blow up a creature or a planeswalker, which is like a little bit more than you usually want to pay, but you'll do it when you have to. If you wanted to do something a little bit flashier, though, you can. You can return a zombie from your battlefield, your graveyard, to the battlefield tapped. So you can play it on your opponent's turn, can't block with the guy, whatever. Just do it EOT and return the biggest, ugliest zombie in Standard from your yard to the table. So that seems like a pretty good thing to be able to do for just 4 mana, I guess, at instant speed, even restricted to the zombie type. So gotta say, don't hate this card. Got some deadly plots of my own to play the card in Standard, but deadly for me. I don't think it's going to be good enough, but I'm still going to try. On the slightly less spooky side, I guess, we got Good Fortune Unicorn, which is like the opposite of a spooky card, it just embodies hope. Either way, this is 3 mana in Selesnya for a 2/2 that whenever you play a creature for the rest of the game while this guy's in play, the creature you just played comes in with an extra +1/+1 counter. okay, decent for like the +1/+1 counter synergies that we see kind of cooking up in limited, but I don't think it goes into standard. Like, you could give it a shot in your Botanical Brawler deck or whatever you're trying to do, but I think if you play a 3-mana 2/2 in standard, you should probably be ready to lose. But, who am I? I don't know anything. We also saw Dwynen's Elite today, so we're turning up the heat slightly right here, man. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 elf, and when it comes into play, if you control another elf, you get another elf. So if you already have a dude on the table when you throw this guy down, it's going to give you a 1/1 elf token. So that's a ton of bodies, man. Again, we're trying to get the elf ball kind of rolling, started down the hill and getting big, and Dwynen's Elite has always been really good at doing that. We got Secluded Courtyard, not necessarily, Cavern of Souls or anything, but again, nice to have it in standard for 5 years. Good to have that option in like creature type matters decks, kinship, whatever you call them nowadays. You just call them that, it's good in those. But we also got Reclamation Sage, which is a really good Magic card. Again, it's not quite Lauren of the Third Path, but it gives the green decks an option to play a card like this, although I guess they could have already been playing Scrap Shooter, which might be better than this. But again, 5 years in standard, we have Reclamation Sage, and the Elves decks will certainly play it. I could sit here and name cards in standard that are probably better than Reclamation Sage and do something very similar, but at the same time, I think it's important that we put some respect on our names. So let's move on to Cathar Commando. You want another creature that can blow up artifacts and enchantments? I guess here's another one. This one has flash, though. This one just rotated out of standard not long ago, and I'm kind of really glad we have it back. I missed her, dude. Like, blue-white tempo decks really like her. Any, aggro deck that's trying to play at instant speed tempo, again, read tempo, really likes this lady right here, and I think she's good in standard at the moment, where she blows up Unholy Annexes and Caretaker's Talents and Urbrass Forge and stuff, while still just being like 2 mana flash 3/1. It's good, serviceable, right there. So again, good to have her back, and I'm kind of pretty excited about it, honestly. Always felt like this was an underrated card, but we also get, speaking of flash 2 mana guys in white, that's actually a pretty small hole to fit through, but we got Resolute Reinforcements over here as well. So if you're kind of counting the days till it rotated out of standard for whatever reason, then restart the clock at 5 years now. It's another one, though, that I think it's kind of always nice to be able to have access to. So I'm glad to have it. Last couple of common or uncommon reprints today. There sure were a lot of them, but some of them are really, really good, like Heraldic Banner. We get this in standard forever now. So also sweet in the decks where your creature type is something that you chose for a reason. So that's pretty cool. I've always liked this, but the best... This is probably an incorrect assessment, but like the uncommon reprint from today that I am most excited to have back, weirdly, I think to some people, is Garricks Uprising. A perfect merger of like a Timmy card and like a Spike card, like a guy that wants to draw some cards and a lady that wants to play big old creatures. Like, really synergizes very well with those two mindsets, but I've always liked this card an awful lot. It's in mono green cube right now. I swear I'll do that video eventually. It is more or less completely built, but I keep dropping teasers and hints for it. It's coming out, I promise. But either way, Garricks Uprising has been great in a bunch of decks that I've built in my career, is that right? My Magic playing lifetime. That's a little less pretentious, but still, I've loved this card for a good long time, and right now in standard, this is the main point I want to make. I finally got to it. Unholy Annex and Caretaker's Talent have proven that like 3-drop enchantments that draw cards can be really, really good, but Unholy Annex draws a card every turn. Caretaker's Talent draws a card 9 turns out of 10. It's fairly easy to draw a card off that thing, so this does not necessarily do that, but I still kind of want to try dropping it alongside, the completed Nissa Planeswalker and getting, a huge guy every single turn. You're more or less guaranteed in drawing them cards. If you already have a relatively large dude in play when you drop it, you draw some cards. We just saw, again, I feel like I keep bringing this card up. We just saw Slumbering Cerberus the other day, a 2-drop 4-power guy. It goes pretty well with this on curve. I like that. But again, if you have to wait to play this on turn 4 to draw your card, there's plenty of 3-drops in standard that are super formidable and have 4 powers. So I've just always liked this. I haven't even talked about the All Your Guys Have Trample mode, which is underappreciated and in some ways the best mode on the card. I just really, really like Garricks Uprising. I feel like I've hammered that in hard enough at this point. I'm not sure that it's quite good enough for standard play, especially in the face of all the other ways we're drawing cards in standard. We have Up the Beanstalk in green, for God's sakes. I'm not sure. This is not better than Up the Beanstalk. unless it goes with Up the Beanstalk. When you think about it, it's very similar to Up the Beanstalk. I just really like this. Doesn't draw you a card off Sunfall like Beans does, but I still think it might have, some small space to kind of fit into Standard at some point during its lifespan, which will be long. But let's start in on the reprinted rares today, and I guess we'll look at a couple of reanimation targets in current Standard, starting with Drakaseth, Maul of Flames. This dude's back, dude. I have played a lot with this guy. I feel like on camera. I feel like there's gameplay footage from way back when this card was originally in Standard where I'm playing it. But this guy's kind of awesome. He's not as good as most of the other 7 drops we have access to in Standard. Vaultborn Tyrant, Atraxa, if you look at a reanimatable dude like Valgavoth, it's just better than something like this. But, I still think that maybe alongside a push-pull, which naturally gives this thing haste, you're just going to dome your opponent for 4 and then blow up 2 of their guys or blow up 3 of their guys in total. Drakaseth has always had this amazing attacks trigger that's way better than it looks, and it looks pretty good. So really sweet to have a 7 mana, 7/7 flying Wrath. Your Wrath the other side of the board when it comes out practically. It really feels that way most of the time. So I know this is the first rare reprint we're talking about today, which kind of denotes that it's not great. But that does mean we've got a lot of good rare reprints to check out. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Drakaseth is terrible, but he'll really have to fight for a spot in Standard. Same thing with freaking Runescar Demon. Again, speaking of reanimatable guys, I guess this is one of them, but if you're going to pay 7 mana, for a dude, then I think you just have better options in Standard. But this is a 7 mana demon that when it comes into play, you cast Demonic Tutor. You just tutor up whatever card in your whole deck you want to. So again, alongside push-pull or something like that, or maybe in some sort of Solar Flare, read a reanimator / control hybrid with Rite of the Moth or something. Flashing back Rite of the Moth in the late game, getting your Runescar Demon and grabbing any card you want to seems like exactly the kind of play that deck wants access to. So again, this is down here kind of at the bottom of the rare reprints, denoting that it seems like I don't like it, but I actually really like it. It's just another card that has to fight for a slot in the decks that it kind of naturally fits into, given all the options we have available to us. But there might be a deck or two that plays that Silver Bullet Runescar Demon to tutor up whatever it wants, and I think that's actually a pretty good plan to be on. Not to mention, last thing, Unholy Annex is a card in this format. It will be forever. A lot of people, well, not for a couple of years. Foundations will be in the format freaking forever, but yeah, Unholy Annex is really popular right now, and this is just kind of another option for a demon to play with that card. But now let's start in on some creature-type stuff, everybody. Now, I know how much you guys like creature-type stuff. You like pirates? Not really? Well, tough. We got Corsair Captain today. Corsair Captain. This is 3 mana for a 2/2, which is not a good stat line, especially with no keyword abilities, but it does have a cool ETB and an okay line of text. When it enters the battlefield, you create a treasure token. All right. And other pirates you control get +1/+1. So a pirate anthem effect in a 5-year set, that seems okay. Maybe we'll actually be able to use that at some point. Right now is probably the best time, but I'm still not sure. I'm just not convinced that this is great. We already have a few creatures in Standard that cost 3 mana and create a treasure token. We had Jewel Thief just rotate out of Standard. I think we already have a 3 mana red pirate, oddly enough, that comes into play and makes a treasure token. These do not really see play, as much as I like them some of the time. So I think this is one of the weaker anthem effects or creature type matters cards of the entire day, but still one you got to point out. There are a few people out there that love pirates, so happy Halloween, I guess. But moving up a little bit, a lot, we got Death Baron over here. Death Baron in Standard, everybody. The Skeletons deck is really popping off. You don't get your Corpses of the Lost on turn 3. You'll get your Death Baron instead, man. This is 3 mana for a 2/2 guy that gives all of your zombies and skeletons +1/+1. And also Death Touch, which is... the Death Touch is, again, kind of an underappreciated mode on this card, but it's also probably the most important part of the card. A 3 mana Anthem effect is fine. I mean, you'll play them some of the time, right? But the Death Touch lets you send all of your guys in, save for maybe 1 or 2, and they don't want to block your guys. They also don't want to swing into the couple of guys you left up. So just Death Touch as a global effect is unbelievable. Just make sure that your Death Baron doesn't get blown away after they make blocks, because that is common. But still, Death Baron is really, really sick to have in Standard in a format where we've been trying to get skeletons to work for like a year. So I think we might actually be able to pull it off, guys. But The best card where the creature type is a thing is... This is ridiculous that we got this card, by the way. It's Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Okay, so I've been looking at EDHrec.com. It's a website for the last few years now. And all, 4 years that I've been looking at EDHrec, I will occasionally check, what are the top 50 commanders of the last few months or whatever it is. And that entire time, that whole 4, 5 even year stretch, I've been checking EDHrec for this exact metric. Lathril has been in the top 5 commanders. Every time. This is one of the most popular commanders you could imagine. And now we have it in standard for half of a decade, which is just kind of nuts. Now, I think that 4 mana for a 2/3 menace in standard is not necessarily where you want to be, given all the other stuff you could be doing at that mana cost. But in the Elves deck, what else are you doing at 4 mana? Dwining? Stop. This is just much, much better. And you could just play both. Porque no los dos. You got all the mana in the world. Play both. So, Lathril, I haven't gotten to the good part of the card yet. I'm just giving you the stat line, which is not a great way to lead because it's all the other lines of text that matter most. Now, first, this middle line of text is whenever it deals combat damage to a player, Lathril, you're going to create that many 1/1 elves, which, okay, you get a couple, boost its power, you get a few more, whatever. But the good part of this card is that you can tap Lathril along with 10 other untapped elves you control to hit everybody at the table, excluding you. Why would you be included? For 10 life, and then you gain 10 life. So... oh boy, we've gotten a couple of big overrun effects, a couple of big Elves Matter effects. We've gotten Genesis Wave as well, which is a good payoff for Elves, making all the mana, having all the guys out, whatever. So we've gotten a few good payoffs for Elves, but I would say this is the one we play. You know what I mean? This has always been the most ridiculous payoff that Elves could imagine. So now that we've got this and Imperious Perfect and Archdruid and Llanowar Elves and Dwynen's Elite and Dwynen herself and 4 other elves I want to play, Thornweld Archers maybe. It's I think we could actually make elves a real deck in standard, guys. I think it's happening. For the first time in forever. For the first time in forever, we might actually be able to pull it off, guys. Lathril is probably, if we were going to get a piece that signaled that it was real, I think Lathril is the only thing that would really make me perk up and be like, okay, we can do it. So I'm going to stop talking about it now because I think I'm getting circular at this point. I'm just kind of freaking out that we have the card in standard. Last stop, I'll say it one more time, and I hate to repeat myself. 4 mana is a bit much, so don't get too excited, but Lathril good. There were a couple of other cards I wanted to look at today, like Rise of the Dark Realms, all of the mana in the world at sorcery speed to empty every graveyard and throw it on your side of the table. So that's fun. That's again, perennial commander card that probably hasn't seen much commander play since that format's been actually caring about how it builds its decks. It's kind of some shade I'm throwing a little bit, but still, this is obviously an incredibly powerful effect. And over the last couple of years, Standard has taught us that if the effect is powerful enough, we'll pay all of the mana for it. You think what? You think we can't? We're going to find a way. But what I think is the most powerful, surefire, standard, playable reprint of the entire day is definitely Authority of the Consoles. And yeah, I'm putting that over Lathril, which I have some doubts about, and some of the Reanimator guys, and oh, don't you think Skeletons will be a deck with Death Baron? Yeah, maybe all that's true, but Authority of the Consoles will go in most sideboards in white, basically every single one, and it may even make some main decks. We're seeing, we already had a black-white life gain deck that was kind of, again, kind of heating up with this set. There's so many different payoffs that we got and enablers. We got another Soul Ward, and it's looking pretty good. So, you could go the creature-based route, but there's also a kind of control-ish or, mid-range / control sort of hybrid life gain deck that looks to also be on the burner a little bit, and I want to know how that one turns out. But I think either one could play this card in the sideboard or more likely the main deck, depending on the build. So this, in case you haven't read it yet, is a Kismet effect. It's a single white mana for an enchantment. Just one white mana for an enchantment that makes all of your opponent's creatures come into play tapped, and whenever a creature comes into play under their control, you gain a life. So that will trigger all of your life gain effects on their turn whenever they want to play to their board. So that seems very good, but also there's a ton of haste creatures. Monastery Swiftspear, Slick Shot, Emberheart Challenger, Godric seeing some play, Squeeze seeing some play, Screaming Nemesis seeing some play. There's so many haste creatures in Standard right now that this kind of helps to nerf. So this will be a great piece against all of the various blends and flavors of mono red that are out there. But now it's time to look at the new stuff. We didn't get quite as much new as old today, but a lot of these are still pretty exciting. But you know, I just got to bring it down from there. Sorry to kill the mood, but we got to go through some of the commons and uncommons first from today, and some of these weren't that impressive, but I actually think we got a pretty good level of playability throughout a lot of these. That said, we got to start with Dauntless Veteran. It is what it is. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 white for a 2/2 human soldier. Whenever this creature attacks, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So like I said earlier, you want to play a 3 mana 2/2, be my guest. I don't know how well that's going to work out for you almost no matter what that card does, but at least this one kind of gives you a Sir Aylin ability. Is that what the guy's called? You know, you just get an anthem effect whenever he attacks, but that said, he has to attack. So this is really just like a 3 mana 2/2 battle cry, and that's probably not good enough. Next is the joke card of the day, but it's kind of no joke. It might end up being one of the more powerful commons in the whole set. It's Heir Apparent here. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 rabbit noble. When it enters, create a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to the number of other creatures you control, named Heir Apparent. That doesn't seem like that powerful, right? Well, here's the catch. A deck can have any number of cards named Heir Apparent. We saw that there was going to be a card with this line of text during Morrow's teaser, but we still hadn't seen it up until today. So this is it, huh? So if your whole deck is Heir Apparent, and on turn 2 you'll play one and get a 2 mana 2/2, that's not great. And on turn 2 you'll play another one. If your first one survived, you'll get a 2/2 and a 1/1, and then you'll get a 2/2 and 2 1/1s. And then you'll start going crazy, but it'll take you a number of turns to actually do it. That said, I gotta admit, you know, like blinking this guy seems like kind of interesting. Maybe bouncing it to your hand and playing it again once you have a number of them on the table. Like, there's definitely cool stuff you can do with it, but just like a lot of the cards that have this line of text, you know, you can have any number of them. It's balanced pretty well, you know, like I don't know how good it's actually going to be, but maybe in Rabbit's decks where, to be honest, I don't think it actually quite makes the mark, and in Tokens decks perhaps, but again, you know, having to have one in play to get any real value off of it, I think is just kind of a killer for a card like this. And even if you already have one in play and you try to play another one, like your opponent can just cut down the first one and you don't get any value. So I think that it's probably kind of a stinker, but the card is pretty exciting to dream about, you know. Once you hit like the 6 rabbit mark, you're probably winning the game, but I just don't know how realistic that actually is. But next, let's look at Hungry Ghoul and Pendant of Greed. Hungry Ghoul is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/2 zombie. You can pay 1 mana, boo, and sacrifice another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Hungry Ghoul. So I guess we're sticking with Bartolome, man. We need a free, that's an important part of the thing here, a free repeatable sacrifice outlet on our turns. So yeah, this guy's cheaper than the 3 mana we'd normally have to pay for a Woe Strider, Nantuko Husk, or any other thing that typically has, you know, a free repeatable sack cost on it. But even at 2 mana, I'm just not like super. Every time I see I have to pay mana to sacrifice a thing, I'm just like not super excited. But in drafts, this is probably going to be a pretty important little signpost common for, it's common. I thought it was uncommon, so that's nice. And this little signpost common for the sacrifice decks, which there appears to be a base for. Now, Pendant of Greed, I think, is a step up in power level for the aristocrats, like the sacrifice decks, but I'm not sure it makes it in Standard. I do want to play it in Commander, though. I want to try this out in Elfsworn Core Commander. Shut up, Deb. What's it do? This is 2 mana for an artifact. Pay 1 and tap it. So mana again. Sacrifice a creature. Draw a card and put a spirit counter on this artifact. Activate only as a sorcery. You can also pay 4, tap, and sacrifice Pendant and have each opponent lose life equal to the number of spirit counters on this artifact. So, okay, you can like proliferate. You can proliferate and put like more counters on this. That's an option we have in Standard. There's a lot of ways to put extra counters on this in Commander, though, or at least enough ways that I want to try out. So, you know, it's a little bit slow. It only allows 1 sacrifice a turn, and it costs mana. So you'd think I would hate this, but I like pretty much any way that an aristocrat has available to draw cards. And this is a once per turn repeatable, like, well, not repeatable, but at least once a turn, like draw engine. And the decks really, really need something like that. And in the late game, you just kind of throw it at them, so that might be enough damage to kind of finish things off after you've gotten all your Aysell core triggers and all that stuff. So I don't know, something is making me like this card, but I think it's slightly priced out of standard playability, and for that matter, I think the card quality in Aristocrats right now is just overall higher than this. I'm not sure that it gets a jersey when it comes to tryouts. Up next is a pretty neat little Golgari 4-drop here. This is Wardens of the Cycle. 4 mana, 1 a black and 2 green for a 3/4 elf warlock with Morbid. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, choose 1. Either gain 2 life or draw a card and lose a life, which is probably what you'll do more often than not. I want to love this, man. Again, I think this is probably really good in Limited, where it's pretty easy to engineer a creature dying. You want it for your Elves decks, likely. You want it for your Aristocrats decks, almost certainly if you're in these color combinations. So, decent card for those decks, but in Standard, come on, it's 4 mana, guys. We got Archfiend of the Dross, we got Sheoldred. I'd rather play the Swarmweaver, We've got just much better options at 4 mana, even for the Elves decks. We just discussed that in this video. Got Lathril and Dwine, and I'm not sure this makes the cut, but again, cool little design on this. I kind of like what it does. I like the cut of its hair, It's, again, cool and Limited, so altogether nice card here, but don't think it's going to break through. But let's step it up just slightly, at least in my estimation, because we got to look at Dreadwing Scavenger next. This is 3 mana, 1 a blue and a black for a 2/2 flying nightmare bird. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, draw a card and then discard a card. Also has Threshold, so if you've made the Threshold, this guy becomes a 3/3 and has Death Touch. Okay, so potential 3 mana 3/3 Death Touch that always has an ETB trigger, and if it survives a couple of turns, it'll really loot you a good amount of cards, whether you're trying to flash stuff back, reanimate stuff. I guess you can get some value out of the graveyard thing, but even if you're just filtering cards every turn with this guy, he's actually kind of good, Just like I've said with the 4-drops in this video, you have to compare him to the 3s we have access to in Standard, and I just think they're probably better for the most part, but I again think that it's kind of important to count that this has not only an ETB trigger but also an attacks trigger, and that can get kind of dangerous, like start really producing a lot of value for you pretty fast. So fuels itself to make sure it gets Threshold if you're not doing it any other way, dumps cards in your yard, just altogether sick little guy here that I'm just not sure is quite right for Standard, but he ain't as far off as some of the other stuff we've seen today. He's all right. Now, we're on the last 3 commons and uncommons that were in the new batch today, but all of these are kind of hyped for different reasons. We got Elfsworn Giant. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 5/3 giant with reach, but it also has a landfall. Whenever you landfall, you get a 1/1 elf. I'll take it, man. Like, 5 mana is probably priced out. I gotta say it again. I hate to be kind of a broken record here, but I think that this is probably a little bit too much for Standard, but who knows in these landfall builds, which have been getting the juiciest stuff, dude. Like, they got Balos the other day, the 6/6 with landfall, get a 4/4. Now they have a 5 mana guy that landfalls, get a 1/1. We already had Iridescent Vine Lasher in the format, and there's a couple of other important landfall pieces. There's obviously Aftermath Analyst and Lumbra to make sure you can get the lands back from your yard to actually proc all this stuff. So, 1 mana or a 1/1 guy doesn't seem like super impressive, especially when you look at a constructed, 1v1 environment. It doesn't seem great, but when you can engineer a situation where you get this guy down and Aftermath Analyst, actually pull that off, and he just creates like 8 to 10 1/1s for you, then like he's probably worth that, price tag, mana value wise. But I think in the landfall decks and Commander, this guy's probably going to find a home until the end of time. Everybody loves landfall. And, it's no Felidar Retreat. That costs 4 mana and makes 2/2s. But I still think you're looking to find, fill your deck with like all the best landfall triggers. And even though it's a bit steep, this is still a very good landfall trigger. But now let's look at Perforating Artists, everybody. 3 mana, 1 a black and a red for a 3/2 devil with Death Touch. It also has Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacks a non-land permanent or discards a card. So this is a nice little ability, man, reminiscent of like Braid's ability or something, right? Or Osseous Stick Twister, I guess, if you wanted another reference. Just these things that at EOT, they make your opponent sack something if you completed an action, right? And I really kind of like this. This can have relevance on turn 3, the turn that you play it. This can force a pretty rough decision on your opponent, So I actually think this is all right. It doesn't have like a very relevant creature type, but it is a 3 power, 3 mana death touch guy, and you could do a lot worse than that in terms of like rate and keyword abilities for mana cost, whatever. So I don't hate the actual like package here in terms of what you're getting, just in terms of stats. It's not a 3 mana 2/2. They at least gave it an extra point of power and gave it a keyword, and a good keyword at that. But still, yeah, I think it's not going to be too hard to get an attack together most turns. And if you do, this guy will start wrecking your opponent sooner rather than later. This is a tough decision to have to make. So kind of love this guy, like, a lot. But I kind of don't think there's any question about what the best new uncommon of the day was, and it's kind of unassuming, but I promise you Bolt Wave is special. This is a single red mana for a sorcery that deals 3 damage to each opponent. That's right, Lava Spike, over and over. Just keep saying Lava Spike. We get another Lava Spike. In Modern, I guess, we get another Lava. It's probably going to be important there, right? But, like, in Standard... Is that the right card? Lava Spike. It's 1 mana for 3 to the dome every time. So, burn, man. We might have a burn deck. We just saw that kicker burn spell that's always a shock, but sometimes does twice the amount of damage as a shock if you kicked it. We have shock as well. We have Lightning Helix. We have Boros Charm, 2 mana for 4 to the dome. We got Stoke the Flames, that's 4 to the dome. We've even got that stupid like Regatha Invasion thing, right? It costs 3 mana for 4 to the dome and 1 to a creature. It's like burn is seriously coming together, dude. We got that thing that's like an adventure, right? It costs 3 mana for 3 damage to any target, or it's also a 2 mana creature that gives your burn spells like lifelink. Like, we are cooking, dude. Virtue, the red Virtue looks really good in this potential burn deck. So we have a deck cooking up right now where like every single spell in the deck is a decent burn spell, and we just like have not had that in Standard for a while. Remains to be seen whether it's a better plan to just be on mono red, but I guess if you're the burn player, you just crisp up all their little like, 2 toughness guys and then finish them off with burn in the late game. We need better ways of like drawing cards in this potential deck, because I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as fast as like Pauper or Modern burn. It's probably going to be slightly more mid-range, but I mean, look, with 12 1-mana burn spells that are all playable and can go to the dome, like, maybe it doesn't have to be slow, So this is a very exciting card to get in Standard. We may not have gotten Lightning Bolt, but this is kind of the next best thing for all intents and purposes. Burn may be real, and I think that's going to make a lot of people kind of upset, but I'm super excited, dude. Let's get toasty. But now let's actually get to the rares. There are 4 of them today, and they're all kind of good. Like, Alinda, Saint of Dusk comes back. Alinda... everybody loves her, man. The Dusk Rose reappears. 4 mana, 2, a white and a black for a 4/4 legendary vampire knight with both lifelink as well as hexproof from instants. That's a big deal. As long as your life total is greater than your starting life total, Alinda gets +1/+1 and has menace. Alinda gets an additional +5/+5 as long as your life total is at least 10 greater than your starting life total. So 10/10 lifelink menace protection from instants for only 4 mana. But it's probably not going to be that very often. Let's be honest. I think the best thing about this is that you get a nigh unkillable 4/4 lifelink for the pretty reasonable cost of 4 mana here. Again, I think a lot of lifelink decks might rather play Enduring Tenacity. If they don't want to play that, they might rather play that new Angel that costs 4 mana for a 3/3 flyer that has the Ajani's Pridemate text, so it gets larger as the game goes on and you gain life. It also draws you cards as you gain life, so that's just seems like a banger 4-drop for that deck. So again, the 4-drop slot in life gain is a little clogged up right now, but this doesn't even have to necessarily be in a life gain focused deck. This should just be in an Orzhov mid-range deck and be all right. Now it contends with Sheldred, it contends with Biza in that slot. So again, hold your horses here, but a 4 mana 4/4 lifelink, if it gets through one time, might start giving itself the first bonus, so now it's a 5/5 lifelink. Now in menace, and if it gets through from there, suddenly it's huge. You know what I mean? Like, it's self-sustaining, it's self-fulfilling in a way. So if it gets through for a couple of shots and hasn't eaten your opponent alive yet, then maybe you get to that 30 life mark, and now it almost certainly will kill your opponent. But most of the time, I would just imagine this is a 4/4 lifelink for 4 mana. And that's already kind of getting there, although not quite. You add hexproof from instance, and now they can't cut it down. They can't go, well, they can't cut it down, period. They can't go for the throat. They can't get lost. And those are the 2 most played removal spells in the format, period. You know, like maybe this makes the obliterating bolt stock rise, but I kind of doubt it. Either way, it's kind of very, very tough to actually kill this once it's on the table, given how we build our decks nowadays. That's probably the best part of the card. So kind of have my eye on her. I think she might be really good, but again, she's got some pretty rough company to contend with in that slot. Next is Sky Knight Squire here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 Cat Scout. Whenever another creature you control enters, this guy gets a +1/+1 counter. As long as this creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has flying, and is a knight in addition to its other types. So, okay, for 2 mana, you could have, you know, I was going to say like a 4/4 with flying. But the deal here is that the guy is going to get enormous as the game goes on, like way bigger than a 4/4. way, way bigger. But once he's a 4/4, he's basically a 2 mana 4/4 flyer. And I don't know how you could ever expect the rate to be a little bit better than, to be any better than that. When you compare him to stuff like Kyrion Beastcaller and, you know, the green 2-drop Inspector guy, the detective that gets you a clue and grows, you know, that guy. You compare him to other 2-drops like this that grow whenever a creature comes into play, and suddenly he kind of seems like he sucks, right? Because, like, you know, he starts at 1. Everybody else starts at 2. But a lot of those guys have restrictions, right? I think both like Beastcaller and the other guy, you have to play creatures larger than them. This is just whenever any creature comes into play. So if you play this on 2, hop to it on 3 perhaps, then like suddenly he's a 4/4 flyer the turn he starts being able to attack. Which is like, okay, this guy goes really well with hop to it, but just any tokens-based strategy, he's fairly decent in, I shouldn't have to tell you. You know, Overlord of the Mistmoor is a turn or 2 after that. That's 2 guys that entered play. You know, he gets a lot larger. Carrot Cake, sack the Carrot Cake. This guy's getting really, really big, so I like him. Even in like the Boros decks that play Gleeful Demolition, you know, that's a 1-mana card that gets you 3 bodies. You'll probably play more bodies that turn, so imagine how huge this guy can get just with a couple of mana at your disposal in that deck. So again, it's going to be tough to squeeze him in alongside all the Wardens of the Inner Skies and Immodane's Recruiters and Sanguine Evangelists and all that stuff. I'm not sure he quite makes the cut, but you can see where I'm going with this. The card is potentially very powerful in decks that have this sort of burst potential when it comes to putting creatures onto the table. Even stuff like Urbrass Forge is kind of decent with this because you're guaranteed to get a creature and grow him every single turn. So I don't know, dude. I'm kind of a huge fan of this. I like 2-drops that get really good as the game goes on, and this guy's definitely a massive candidate. Even if you don't hop to it on turn 3, you just like double spell and play a couple of guys, like congratulations, you played a Watchwolf, you know, a 2-mana 3/3 on his first attack step, and he'll only get better as the game goes on. Along with stuff like Beauregard Mentor and Regal Bunnycorn, I think we have a core of 2-drops that is just like insane in these like go wide decks. So love this dude. Next is a neat looking rare here. Let's take a look at Aysell Harvester. 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 3/2 Demon Warlock. Tap to exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. Then exile all other nightmare tokens that you control. So they felt like he was too powerful, and they nerfed him slightly with that last line of text, but I still think he's actually really sick, dude. He might not be quite good enough with the 2 toughness. He's a 3-drop they can cut down, and these are things you have to evaluate when you see cards that you want to play in Standard. You also have to wait an entire turn to actually play him, right? So there's to actually tap him, so there's that to worry about. But I think he's really potentially quite good, man. Like as an anti-reanimator tool, I think he's cool because sometimes they'll put a guy into their yard and reanimate him the same turn. Also, like if you just like play this guy and hold him up, they kind of can't dump a dude into their yard for the rest of the game. I've seen a lot of people kind of just evaluate this guy on the basis of like, oh, their guys die and then you can replay them, you know? Or, you know, your guy dies and then you can replay them. And like, that's true. But also, if you discard a creature, you can play him from the graveyard that turn. If your opponent discards a creature to Liliana, Bandit's Talent, whatever, you know, then suddenly you get that guy. So your opponent has to be like way more discerning about what they discard. So this guy could go in the discard decks. This guy could be an anti-reanimation piece. This guy could be a pro-reanimation piece in a reanimator deck. There's so much things this guy is capable of. So I just don't know that people are like quite evaluating him right, because again, like most of the talk I see about this guy is like, oh, guys die, you bring them back, which is another wrinkle the thing has that you are capable of doing, which is actually pretty gross, right? But that's good. But again, I think just the idea of like making your opponent discard a guy, or you discarding the Valgavoth and making a token copy of it on 4, like that all seems like gravy to me, dude. So kind of sign me up for this guy. But next is an absolutely wild red mythic. This is my favorite card of the day, even though I'm not sure if it's the best card of the day in all formats. I don't have to care. It's my show. This is Rite of the Dragon Caller. 6 mana, 4 and 2 red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. My God, it's got 6. It's got 6 mana. Like let's all just get that. Okay, the only downside of this card is the mana cost. All right, so it's 6. It's so much mana. Don't care. I don't care. I just don't care. Like, imagine first of all, casting Doppelgang. Okay, can we go as big as possible with this thing? Let's cast Doppelgang and make it one of our targets so that we get 2 or 3 copies of it. Now, when we cast Doppelgang, we get a 5/5 because we cast an instant or sorcery. And then when we cast our next instant or sorcery, we get like 4 5/5/5s. And I want to make it happen. It seems like win more, but there are already Doppelgang decks in Standard that might actually kind of be into this plan a little bit. Although they'd much more likely play like Overlord of the Boiler Bilges or something that can kill your opponent right then and there. So I don't even know if that's possible, but like maybe big red or some sort of ramp deck that wants to get to this and then start playing. You know, you can play ramp spells like Glimpse the Core, for instance, that are instant and sorceries that, you know, will start making 5/5s later in the game once you have this down. If you're just like a red-white, you know, Sunfall pile. You know, I've got Sunfalls, I've got Day of Judgments and other sweepers and stuff like that. I'm going to hide behind an Urabrass Forge. Urabrass Forge is probably the better card to get that done because it costs half what this cost and ends up making bigger creatures eventually. But I still, again, kind of don't care. I want to try it out. Every deck I want to put it in, there's like a fence right there that's like, no, this card's better. Don't do it. But like, I'm way too tempted by this. And I haven't even gotten on Commander yet, dude. I think in Commander, despite the fact that this is an overpriced red mythic, you know, both in terms of what it might actually end up costing, but also the mana value. You know, it's just the dumb red mythic of the set. I still think this is probably super duper playable in Commander, dude. I think that it's kind of fun to envision like reanimating it. You know, we've got a Boilo's Awakening in Standard right now that can reanimate this. It's a 1/1 flyer. That's not great, but you get a couple of instants and sorceries in the meantime. We've got Campus Renovation. Isn't that in Standard? Costs 5 mana. But can reanimate this and effectively draw you a couple of instants and sorceries to work with it. So, I don't know, dude. I got plans, I got options, I got ideas. I know this card costs way too much mana. And again, just to reiterate, in case you didn't catch it the first 5 times, do not care. I'm very excited on like sort of a Timmy level about this card. But there is something about it that makes me think it is much better than it appears to the hard-hearted Magic player that's been doing this forever and can't get excited about cards anymore. I think it's better than a lot of you probably think it is. But the final card of the day here is Loot, Exuberant Explorer. We got another version of Loot, everybody. Isn't he adorable? 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 1/4 Legendary Beast Noble. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Also, though, you can pay 6 mana and tap Loot to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from among them and put it onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Hey, this doesn't say on the bottom of your library, it just says on the bottom. Nice. Have they actually been doing that for a long time and I've just now noticed? It could be. My mind just always auto-completes of your library. That's not what matters. That's not what matters here. What matters is that we have yet another like 3 mana guide that lets you play another land on each of your turns. So that might make it good enough. Is it better than Spelunking or something in Standard? I don't know. Time will tell. But I actually think that activated ability is pretty slick, dude. Like looking at the top 6 and getting, well, you know, if you paid 6 for it, maybe you got a mana dork or a rock or something. So you're only looking, you know, you can only get like a 5 drop or whatever. It doesn't matter. I still think that's really, really awesome. If you can get 6 because you paid 6. If it basically, you know, you get a 6 drop or less off of it, then that's phenomenal. But later on in the game, You know, these Teamer Doppelgang, and this could very easily go, I'm serious this time, this could easily go in Teamer Doppelgang. They want to play extra lands, right? They have a lot of mana laying around. They're looking for mana sinks, and they would love to play something for free off the top of their library every turn. 6 mana, that's nothing. I got 14. So you're barely cutting into my stash here. So again, man, I should point out Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a card in this standard, which makes you reevaluate any activated ability that you see. But an activated ability this strong, I think that Agatha's Soul Cauldron might actually want that, especially in tandem with Agatha herself. Do you even know what that does? It reduces the cost of activated abilities of creatures that you control, which I think might be really sick with this guy, especially if you do have a Soul Cauldron and multiple guys have this ability on them at the same time. What can you actually do? Cook. You can freaking cook. So that's what I'm trying to do right now. These are all kind of far-fetched scenarios that require multiple cards and a pretty dedicated game plan. So again, I have to say, could all be for naught, but when you have a 3-mana dude that lets you play extra lands, can't be bolted, I guess that's worth pointing out, then I think you have a solid Magic card in and of itself. And when you start adding icing to the top of that cake, especially, this is that strawberry icing, man. This is the good stuff, This is very good in terms of what activated abilities they could have put on it, because usually the gravy is a little bit light when you see cards like this. But in this case, yeah, it's expensive, but they kind of went all out. That is a very abusable activated ability. But that is Itsky Lowitsky. I think I've got one more video I want to put out. That's actually kind of a preview video. If nothing else, it's going to be sharing all my thoughts on this set, and I think that there's a lot to say there. So again, stay tuned with the channel tomorrow for the probably preview finale, if I had to guess. This was a fast preview season for such a enormous, gigantic set when you count the starter collection on top of everything. There's a lot going on here, so we've got a lot to break down in the next week or so. I'm going to be getting together with Power Dragon. I know how much you guys like when we do that. So we're going to talk about the reprints in this set, the overrated cards, the underrated cards, perhaps the overrated and underrated reprints. So I got a lot of work to put out with that guy, and I know how much you like that. But we got the top 50 to look at least a top 50 in a 600 card set, right? You should do a top 100, but still a top 50, top 10 sleepers to come out. There's deck techs to look at. There's all kinds of things to uncover when it comes to this set. So stay tuned. Sub to the channel, sub to the sandwich if you'd rather. Hit the button shaped like a thumb. I think it's actually supposed to be a thumb. I've got a team of scientists on it, but apart from that, you can check out the Patreon. Just $1 a month is all I really ask for you, or of you, I guess. And I also feel like I'm worth it. I feel like I put in an awful lot of work on this couch. So if you feel like I'm worth it too, then $1 a month is all I really ask from you. It helps out tremendously. But it's been a long video and a long spoiler season. I'm going to get to editing. I'm also going to make some of those little White Castle hamburgers from the freezer. I think that's what I want. I've earned it. But anyway, guys, happy Halloween. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And I love you very much. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.